Don't sell your multi-crew ships. Don't sell your Carracks, your Odysseys, your cap ships, etc. I'm going to explain to you why Chad McKinney's post by CIG's personnel is talking about these changes to bed logging and why it's not the end of everything we know. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank Tim among subscribers. Now let's talk about this for a minute. This is something that has been multi-years in the making, and we've already seen it in Death of the Spaceman. And how do I know that? Because Chris Roberts himself and Rich Tyrer, before he moved over to Squadron, were covering a heavy amount of these type of topics about the feel and the way it should feel in the persistent universe to be your person, why you should care about your character, and why certain things are going to need to be, well, a bit of resistance, a bit of friction in order to exist. Now, when we take a look at what Chad McKinney wrote, we can take a look and we can say, look, this is not the end of beds. This is just the end of bed logging constantly, and it does not fit into the vision. The fundamental bed logging itself doesn't fit into the vision. And when you read into that, you go, oh my goodness, bed logging's bad. I thought there's whole ships that are designed for exploration, massive distances, etc., etc. And then you actually look into logging in, persistence, spawning, and everything around it. And speaking specifically about player-created outposts across multiple solar systems and persistent habs and hangars and server meshing, you start putting it together. And what I see, to me, is the use of material. I believe what we're dealing with here is that your character will be able to short-term use beds and such to take away things like fatigue or stress, etc. But over time, you will need more complex material and also supplies. So when you go into the Carrack with its beautifully well-stocked crew mess, or you go into a massive cap ship that has an entire mess hall, or any ship in between, you see a lot of stuff. But if you walk into a 100i and you notice the walls are pretty barren, and it may have a bed, but that's about it, you're going to have more of a difficulty. We've already seen this discussion pop up multiple times about hygiene. We've joked about showers and toilets and how some ships don't have them, such as the Cutlass series, and how they really need to add that. And honestly, that's a short-term concern compared to the longer-term issue of being able to, what's a colloquial term, to bed logging on a ship. So I believe that there will be a fundamental shift in what bed logging means and what it means to disable your character on a ship for a period of time when you're not at the keyboard for a certain amount of time. I believe it will cost resources. Now, I'm giving CIG, obviously, the benefit of the doubt, and I trust that they will show their vision very soon as we move through things. And these changes are not in 3.23 as noted in Chad's post. But what I do think we can all learn from is if we look at the previous videos from Chris Roberts and Rich Tyrer, which is why I referenced them at the beginning, and we take a look at how this kind of evolved through the last major crisis of fundamental changes to the game, which I would argue is Death of a Spaceman. Suddenly people were dying and not able to have their armor, where it went from just losing the gun you were carrying if it was presented, and then it went to losing entire suits of gear, and how we kind of moved past that, healing mechanics, multiple tiers, how you needed more and more equipment, and how that system is still maturing. Eventually, you will need medical supplies to offer a certain level of tier treatment into an injury. So the bigger the ship, the more regenerations it can offer if it has that capacity, or the bigger the ship in general, the more just general medical supplies it can carry, and therefore keep you in the game longer and keep you fighting fit, so to speak, for your missions and whatnot, whatever else you're doing for you're pulling your contracts. So, with all that said, I see this in the same vein. We're looking at a situation where Your medical fitness is just as important as your fatigue and your long-term sustainment of your character. And the bigger the ship, the more it'll be able to endure over time outside of the general things such as player-owned star bases and other types of things when you get to persistent habs. And don't forget, we're not just built, sorry, not star bases, but outposts. But don't forget, we're not just building outposts. We will be able to have facilities that you will persistently be able to exist in that are in the large planetary landing locations, and ideally in the smaller NPC spaces as well, if you don't feel like building an entire outpost. And this also adds to an org value. By having a place that you can stop at and resupply, replenish yourself as much as your ship now, I think this will change things drastically. Now, the last thought I have before I go into the tapes is the vision for 1.0 stuff. No, 1.0 is not coming before 3.23, and it's not coming before 4.0. As far as we can tell, based on everything that CIG has publicly said, that is not the case. And even the rumor mill is arguing that's not the case either. A lot of the theory crafters out there and people trying to divine the tea leaves are saying the same thing. They're saying that it's going to go to 3.23. It'll probably go to incremental patches past there, and we'll be ready for the 4.0, which we're already seeing testing of the Pyro jump gate, for example, which is publicly able to talk about now, thanks to the changes to Evocati's rules. And we've seen that directly, them releasing the patch notes so people can read them and talk about them and converse with them. So that's a pretty interesting and very awesome transparency thing by CIG, where we can start seeing the beginnings of the testing. Now, as a reminder for 3.23, if you want to get in the game, you can jump into the PTU with the early waves. That's subscribers and the higher concierge. I know. I'm not the fan of that way either, but anyway. And as the waves continue, probably very quickly, we'll start to see more and more players get into PTU. Now, for 3.23, you want to get your game face on for master mode to be able to test that out and see how that's going to change your gameplay. Maybe some ships you want to CCU or ships you want to purchase in game, before the economy changes hit for 3.23 live. So with that out of the way, I'm kind of done all my local talk I wanted to get in here. Let's go into the tapes. Let's revisit the time when there was a much busier time period in Star Citizen's lifetime with the death of a spaceman and what that meant, what it really looked like, what players thought over the span of over an entire year as it came out and it matured more. So, yeah, don't panic. Let's relax, watch the tapes.
A little bit about, but the goal with Star Citizen is to, essentially it's a virtual life. I mean, and we are trying to simulate, or obviously in a more primitive state than the real world, but simulate all the things that would happen. Like naturally, you would think, okay, if I'm going to go to the Antarctic, I've got to like bring my supplies with me. I've got to worry about if I get hurt and all these things. That I think create great gameplay opportunities and also great cooperative gameplay opportunities, right? So there's a lot of things that we talked about that clearly, if you're going to be adventuring in a dangerous place, having equipment and having people with you is probably a good thing, because otherwise something goes wrong, you're by yourself. And so I feel like when we get a lot of, I mean, and there's been a lot of engineering just on the very low level and some scalable stuff that we have to do to enable a lot of these systems. And but over the next year or 2 years, we've got a lot of this stuff sort of coming online, and I feel like when they all start interoperating together, that it will be an experience like no other. I mean, I don't know another game that does it to the level, and that is actually one of the challenges of building a game the way we're building it, sort of while people are playing it and we're building it. Definitely Spaceman is a good example, because it's something that I talked about at the very beginning as a core concept. It's always been a core concept, but we're only just now getting around to starting to implement the actual functionality and the gameplay features that will enable it. And I think when you have it, that will make people behave very differently in the verse, which is going to be super cool.
Yeah. Now, you buried the lead there at the end. That's big news. We are now beginning the process of actively putting this into development. It's been this idea, it's been this core tenet of Star Citizen's character since it was first introduced.
Our persistent universe, in terms of how do we encourage the players to stay alive? How do we encourage the players to keep their ship or repair their ship intact. We don't want people to just go, oh, I got a scratch, I'm just going to respawn in a perfectly, pristine state for, the character or the ship. And so Death of the Spaceman was sort of an idea to give an association with your player character in the game, in terms of this is who you are, and you want to keep yourself alive as possible, as much as possible, and identify with your avatar as an actual real person and character, and you care about, and you want to keep alive. And then finally, when you've had one too many close calls or lost one too many battles, you no longer can be resuscitated, and you have to pass on essentially to your next of kin, which will have you call out basically who your next of kin is when you're sort of doing your character creation.
Me again from the beginning of the story. When this video dropped and some of the Spectrum posts started coming out about Death of a Spaceman and hints of what was coming started coming out, there was people talking about selling every single ship you have. LTI only means to the life of the character that you first start with at the beginning of the game on launch, when we switch over to beta or the full game or whatever, and none of it had any substance. None of it. These videos, these little clips that you're watching, are actually from a Calling All Devs Death of a Spaceman from October 20th, 2020. Now, we've had a few interesting things that set back the progress of the project a little, just a tad, right, in different parts of this, and yet we still made it through. We still have a usable game. Your ship still means something, whether they're purchased in game or through this store on the website, etc. And most importantly, your character may have more value, more weight, more caring, more, just the gear alone means something. But I see this change to the attempts of bedlogging coming in for 1.0 when that eventually happens. My theory is years from now, as something to not be afraid of. The discussion of drastically different game now that we have server meshing, persistence tabs, and hangers, and all that doesn't matter, because I see the words fundamentally bedlogging itself doesn't entirely fit that vision. I believe that they will add weight to bedlogging. It will cost resources. You might even have a character that's wandering the decks as an NPC when you log, but you will still be able to utilize your ship. I think it will be costly to keep characters, and by the way, normal NPCs, not just players that are, Agent Smithing out of it or something, using that old term if you were from those days. Agent Smith was in the Matrix series, and it's the concept that this agent of the system could turn any random person into a top agent of the system, the bad people in this game, but in that game, but in the universe, but in this verse, it'd be good and bad people, because the idea would be that players could just teleport into an NPC. And if Agent Smithing was to make a comeback for larger ships, like for example, your friend has an Idris and suddenly he wants to go take it out, Joe and Joanna and Jim Bob and everybody's going to pile into this damn Idris. Instead of having to go all the way over there, you might be able to teleport into one of the characters on the ship, provided that those characters have the certain particular resources, provided there's certain services on that ship that's large enough for those type of capabilities. We have to see. That's the biggest surprises I'm waiting to see, is like when we start talking about 1.0 and we start talking about these major changes to bedlogging, it's not just a negative thing. This is a push-pull effect. If there's changes to bedlogging where it takes resources, we might see a complete change in how you appear in the game, literally, like how you physically set foot in the game. Now, right now, when you log into the Star Citizen game, what you do is you wake up in a bed. It may not always be an outpost in space, such as a space station, or an outpost on the ground, because those things don't exist yet, at least for us to bedlog in yet. But it's going to be, I think, most of the time not a ship, based on what they're saying. Unless you, yes, you, and maybe your friends or org mates plan that eventuality. So expedition-based ships may want to keep a very small crew, and the whole point is that the resources are being consumed whether or not they're logged in or not. The ships that are much larger will need to budget for those needs, and they may have multiple crews across different time zones to make it worth their time to have such a ship in operation. Sure, that doesn't mean you won't be able to, as it says here, the wiggle room word of entirely fit the vision of 1.0 and beyond, I'm guessing. The idea of bed logging. So I don't think this is Death of a Spaceman level of drama or anything of that sort. I do think that there is going to be significant changes in the concept of bed logging, as in it's not going to be free to bed log in just any random old ship for any extended period of time. So you can't just, once again, the concept of a 100i, or I'll even pick on one of my favorites, the 325A. You can't just hop into a smaller ship and then have infinite time to just sit out in the cosmos, and you're just going to be fine when you log back in a month later. So this, I think, will have an impact, at least in theory, on casual game players. But hopefully the basics of outpost building are in by then. So there's moon operations, and, you know, if they're cheap and small enough in operation, and there's hopefully a lot less resource hungry than a ship to sustain someone, or maybe even completely self-sustaining if it's small enough, the cost benefit of this might be very interesting, to say the least. And I think that's one of the things I really think CIG is going to be looking upon the community to do, is test. Just like with Death of a Spaceman, see what works and what doesn't. And there will be glitches, and there will be horror stories, and there will be people's gameplay that are into certain, well, I'll use the air quotes, meta, that will be impacted by this. But I don't see it as the end of multi-crew ships as we know it, and that is it. Now, to kind of round cap this, I'm going to put one more clip in here. This is from towards the end of the Death of the Spaceman implementation with Rich Tyrer's interview, and it kind of shows how this came full circle. And this is well after that previous interview you just saw. This one took place on, well, it says 2 years ago, which is, okay, September 2021. So, if we're, that's not the date I'm speaking, by the way. Don't read into that too much. It's September 2021 when Rich Tyrer's interview with Jared took place, and it shows the maturity that happened kind of as Death of a Spaceman progressed more and more. And I kind of, once again, I like this because it shows a lot like our environment that we're facing now. The sky is not going to fall. Everything's going to keep going. Yes, your game will change a little bit, but like always, we'll adapt. Things will be fine, and we'll move past it.
It's the realization of this life in the verse that Chris has been talking about since he first published Death of a Spaceman in 2013. Some folks are gonna pull their hair out like, well, oh my god, this is so much different and so much harder.
It's definitely going to be a harder challenge. It's going to be a harder experience. Obviously, we're still in an alpha state, so there's going to be scenarios where bugs happen and the things that are going to feel unfair, and I totally appreciate that. But these are two huge mechanics that were kind of headline features way back when, physical inventory and Death of a Spaceman. These are kind of delivering those experiences, and the next steps will be then the true realization of Death of a Spaceman and the true realization of the physical. But the gameplay loops are what we're delivering, and that's why it's going to be a monumental change. But I mean, I look at it this way: like if I played any survival game or Rust or Ark or any game in general, I put God mode on, or I can just access everything, or I played Witcher 3 and I had an infinite inventory. Those things take away, while they make things easier for me, really they take away from the enjoyment of me progressing and getting access to all the equipment and that sense of achievement that you've done something. And it starts to kind of alleviate that. If in Minecraft, let's just say Minecraft, if I'm Minecraft and I don't lose any of my gear, then death doesn't become, you don't get those sweaty palms when a creeper pops out at you and you're playing hardcore.
So overall, my takeaways from this are we're going to see changes to bed logging, whether we like it or not, it seems. It is in the distant future. it may be something to have a discussion with your org mates, your friends, and if you're a lone wolf type person as well, you may want to consider ships that have more storage space on board, dare I say it, and hopefully CIG fills in the blanks sooner than later about what the vision for 1.0 is, especially in regards to bedlocking. We have had challenges in the past, some of which that were extremely significant, that scared a lot of people, but it was okay. Death of a Spaceman is a thing, and we have lived with it ever since. I don't really see how this game can exist with completely no ability to lock out outside of a ship, but I do understand that it will be limited and there will be things that are required to make it practical and realistic, in the sense of you can't just have an entire ghost fleet logged off for a year at a time or something like that in a place. And I think that some of these actions are an attempt to mitigate those things, mitigate those risks, mitigate those concerns that people may have. Additionally, I think there's always going to be balance in a game such as this. I can think of, for example, to get around Death of a Spaceman, I use cheaper gear a lot of times, not my concierge or subscriber things like rewards or giveaways or my holiday events type things from Luminalia, Day of the Vara, etc., when I anticipate that I will likely die and I am solo, especially if I don't have regen available where I can just go back in and go get it. So I just was having a discussion today with a group on a Discord about the C54, about how I like it so much because it's a cheap piece of kit and they're often available. So if I have extra mags for it, I can swap them out real quick. I can grab it. And for my regen, I often leave a few of them available, as well as helmets and suits when I remember to have them set up on, like it went Carrack, for example, so people can regen and get back in the fun down in the bunkers, etc., when we go that direction. So just like that, you will have different measures players will take to adjust for the changes. There will be that outlier player that is, hey, I've got nothing but a 125A. I love my 125A. I log off in it every time I play, and I play multiple times a week, and I'm frustrated by this change. You know, if it turns out that it needs a certain amount of, you know, food on board or some other resource on board, fuel, energy, etc. Like, for example, at the outpost, if you go inside the ones that are NPC outposts that are already in the game, you'll see that there is power cores, and it'll say what their status is. For example, there might be some other thing like that. It might not necessarily be about food. It might be life support type equipment, especially with resource modes coming in, now that I'm thinking about it. So if you are a fellow YouTuber, or if you're a streamer or something, congrats. Maybe I gave you an angle there to try to keep taking this ball and running with it. I think in this community, I don't anticipate this type of video be my most viewed video or anything like that, but it's more of just my thoughts, maybe from an ever optimist of the community, about what exactly I read this post as. It's not the end of the world. This game will keep going with or without us, but it's the community that truly makes that possible, and embrace that community, and you will find your place in it. And no, we're not excluding anybody. That's all I got. It is what it is. Thanks for sticking around if you made it this far. Once again, thank you to my long-term subscribers. I greatly appreciate you sticking around. While editing this video, I wanted to mention that even Death of a Spaceman, for example, is not fully implemented yet because there isn't a magic number of deaths or amount of damage that your DNA has taken yet to allow you to respawn into a new character. I think a lot of that is due to the fact that the servers, so patch by patch, you have a situation where you have times where you have to remake the character anyway. That'll probably be implemented once we have that ability. And then also the service will need to track the amount of times you've died, and death will matter even more than it already does. But once again, we will adapt. We will change things. And one last thought. If this is a game-breaking thing, if this is like you're just clutching your mouse like you're very upset about this, you're very concerned, you can always make an alt You can get wait until there's a discount game package, especially when there's a referral program for it. If you don't already have an alt, make the alt and then say, okay, look, when I want to have fun with FPS or some other thing that I know I'm going to die a bunch of times in, I'll send the alt in. And then my main character can be like the captain of a ship or something that rarely ever will die. Just a thought in the back of my mind. Probably a lot of players will embrace that concept as well. All right, for real this time, that's all I got. Thank you again to my long-time subscribers for sticking around. I make this as much for you as I do for myself.